Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of this committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following bit of housekeeping and safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and pub stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you have signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed, and can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you're finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Right, to start with, please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, so starting from my left. James.
Thank you, Chair. I'm James Harris. I'm the Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Afternoon all. I'm Elizabeth Goodwin. I'm the Chief Internal Auditor.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Kelly Nash from Strategy Unit.
I'm Romana Rapicula. Sorry. Okay, I'm part of the external auditors. Thank you.
David White, External Audit Manager from Ernst & Young.
Judith Smythe, Councillor for St Jude Ward. Chair, I can't see your face because of your laptop. Either I'll move or you... Thank you. Thank you so much.
Councillor Russell Simpson, Hilsey Ward.
Councillor Spencer Gardner, Drayton and Farlington.
Richard Adair, Councillor for Nelson Ward.
Councillor Stuart Brown, Fratton Ward and Vice Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Benedict Swan, Copner and Anchorage Park Ward, purely observing.
Steve Belshaw, Group Accountant and Technical Financial Planning Team.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Helen Dickerson, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, everyone. First item on the agenda is item 1, apologies for absence. Everyone's here, so no apologies. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at this meeting? None? Perfect. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February 2024. Are members happy that I signed the previous minutes as an accurate record? I think it was only Judith and Stuart that were here. Yeah, I wasn't here. Oh, weren't you? Just Stuart then? Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Judith?
I just want to raise, obviously I have been on this committee before and I've done governance and audit in other organisations. I just wanted to raise a question about the general adequacy of the minutes. I was looking to see what views the committee had last time. I wasn't here. It's too often that it's minuted that the committee noted something, whether or not we were reassured. With the purpose of this committee is for us to be reassured, or to be worried or concerned or dismayed or requiring some action. And I find that too often we've got, we noted, the committee noted. Well, noted can mean anything. And I just think, sometimes we need to be recording in these committees that we were reassured or we were not reassured, rather than just noting. The second thing is that I suppose I've got 2 questions to ask about the minutes. On page, yes, it keeps saying take in report. I thought that meant that the report had to be reproduced.
I don't know, James?
Thank you. In terms of sort of historically how we've recorded for these meetings, take-in report means that the committee has received an introduction and is basically noting that it has considered the report, it has taken the report in. So it's just for assurance that members have read the report and it has been properly introduced. I
think that's what it should say. In my training in this sort of thing, take-in report meant that you were making a note to cut and paste it in there, which I agree wouldn't be reasonable. The third I don't understand minute number 3 on page 7. It isn't finished, or it doesn't make any sense.
The and at the end is leading into 4. So it's 1, 2, 3 and 4.
Okay, but it still doesn't, to me, make full sense. As a matter arising, I'd be interested to know. I mean, certainly one of the things we can do to reduce wasteful spend within the system is to find out things that don't work, that don't produce better outcomes for people. But thank you. Your clarification about and is very helpful.
Is there any more, Judith?
What is a discredited staff equality, diversity and inclusion programme?
Stuart, do you remember that one?
As a matter arising, I'd be interested to know, either formally or informally.
Meeting? Clarified?
Sorry?
Would you like that to be clarified at the next meeting?
I would, please, yes.
James?
I'm glad to see we're asking for directors to provide commentary on each KPI item. That was an issue when I was last on this board, and I would love to see that. The very last matter arising, excuse me, Chair, is page 9. The medium risk was spot purchasing by adult social care. I've got a background in this, but are we talking here about a number of framework contracts that would then people could then draw on when they wanted to spot purchase? That would be the normal way to do it, and I don't see that referred to. I don't quite understand.
I don't know. We can find out.
A simple mitigation was in place of publishing an advert to allow contractors to input into the process. That is usual sort of process, but it's not the same as having a framework contract from which people could then spot purchase. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. James, could we get those questions answered? Thanks. Other than that, shall we sign them off?
Oh, I think you can sign them anyway. I wasn't there. There are matters arising.
Right. Item number 4. Which is the 2021-22 External Auditors Annual Report. We've got David White and Rumana Rafiqullah from Ernst & Young, our external auditors, who are present today, and this is the first of 3 reports from them which we have to consider. David, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
I would just say, sorry.
Judith, did you want to speak?
1st of March 2022, and we're now in 2024. When I was last on this committee, there was a strong discussion about this, and it was agreed that every effort would be made to do it within the financial year previous to this one, because it gets us very much out of kilter with the overall agenda, and that's probably something for you to look at overall.
My understanding was it was due to COVID, but I'm sure David will.
Well, it can't still be due to COVID, can it? And we had a long discussion about this certainly 4 and 5 years ago, and I was disappointed that it was so late. It's 2 years almost out of it. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
I'm guessing you would say the same also for then 5 as well, because that's 22 to 23, so we're also late on both of them.
I would, thank you. Yeah.
Right, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I was going to sort of say, by way of introduction to the 3 items, that, you know, fully appreciate we have reports here ranging across 3 financial years, 2 of which are therefore, you know, as has been noted already, historic by definition. They are here because they are sort of statutorily required reports, and as a result of the timing of the completion of the related work. And as Councillor Smythe has pointed out, you know, that is something that was discussed, has been discussed on multiple occasions in this committee previously, in meetings at which we have both been present. The 3rd report includes within it further information about that sort of overall situation and our current understanding of the steps which are being taken to try to return external audit work on local government accounts to a more normal timetable, which then, you know, again makes it more relevant and timely for the purposes of the committee and the council as a whole. So I think there isn't anything that we would particularly draw to your attention for the first report from the 21-22, and we do fully accept it is very historic. We can go back into some of the reasons for that, but that audit was finally concluded at the beginning of 2024. This is the final piece of reporting that's required from under the Code of Audit Practice for that 21-22 audit year. But it is really just summarising the outcomes of the audit which were previously reported to the committee in the previous municipal year in the full audit results report. The other content that it includes is a commentary on the council's wider arrangements to secure value for money in its use of resources, but which again is immediately superseded by the similar commentary in item 5, and which will then be updated further through our reporting for 23-24 when we get to that stage. So, fully accepting that that is now quite historic, so there wasn't anything that I would particularly mention there. The outcome of the 21-22 audit was an unqualified audit opinion, and there were no matters to report on value for money or under our wider powers for that year.
Thank you. Members, does anyone have any questions? No? Thank you. Do you want to move on to item number... is the report noted, members? Yep. Do you want to move on to item number 5? So
item 5 is then the sort of next stepping stone almost towards item 6, insofar as, again, when I come to item 6, I can talk about this a little bit more, but it is fulfilling our value for money responsibilities for the 22-23 financial year. The audit of the accounts for 22-23 is not completed, and I can talk about that, as I say, more on under item 6. So item 5 is our interim value for money report for 22-23. It confirms that we didn't identify any risks of significant weakness for the council's arrangement for that year, so there are no matters to report in that respect, and it provides an updated version of that value for money commentary that's a requirement under the Code of Audit Practice that we report for each year. But by definition, that doesn't change hugely from year to year because the council's underlying arrangements don't change hugely from year to year. So the sort of front part of the report has some commentary specifically on 22-23, and then there is a slightly updated version of the wider narrative around your arrangements in the appendix at the end of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Smythe?
Chair, I'll pipe down soon. I'm not sure that just saying we noted the report is enough. I think this is a good report and we are considerably reassured by it.
Okay. We can note that we're reassured. Is everyone else happy? Any other questions? No. Thank you. Can we move on to item 6?
Thank you. So item 6 is our audit plan for the 23-24 financial statements. So this sets out our risk assessment and our planned responses to the identified risks, as well as the work that we're required to undertake under our wider responsibilities as the Council's external auditor. It also, as I've sort of touched on briefly, sets out certain sector-wide issues and developments which are relevant to the audit and to the audit of all local government bodies at the moment. So using the big page numbers, I would go to page 8 because this was a supplementary item, so it has its own sort of page references. So here we talk about the process which is ongoing around trying to, as I say, return external audit of local authority accounts to a more normal and timely timetable. So this is what's called the system reset that's being overseen by DLUC. And its overarching purpose, as I say, is to get back onto timetable over the medium term. And this links back to the fact that, as we've said already, we have reports here that cover 21-22, where clearly the audit was delayed quite significantly against the normal timeframes, and the fact that our work for 22-23 to date has been limited to the value for money responsibilities. So there are a number of consultations which have been held around this process. And they are looking at setting what they call a series of backstop dates. So initially for any audits which are open up to and including 22-23, but also then a series of further dates covering 23-24 through till 27-28, which is the 5-year life of the new PSAA contract. And the purpose of the backstop date would be to set a point at which, if you have not completed the audit of a given year, the auditor would then issue what's called a disclaimer of opinion. So the audit would effectively stop, and there would be a limited or a disclaimed opinion on the accounts, and then you would move on to the next financial year, rather than having the situation which has been the case in recent times of audits being open for very prolonged periods of time. And as I say, the intention there is to move back over that period of time to what would have been a more normal timetable of reporting, that we would have reported on a set of accounts in the same year that it was issued, through until the point where sort of COVID and other issues then caused the delays. There are also then consultations around what is required for 22-23 around that value for money commentary, and on possible changes to the SITFA code, which have the potential to sort of ease the requirements around reporting and auditing in certain areas of the accounts. All of that was ongoing, and legislation, I understand, was close to the point of being laid before Parliament at the time which the general election was called. And that therefore meant that it all sort of went back up into the air to an extent. And so there is no certainty or final position on any of this at the moment. So we are kind of reporting to you our current understanding and our interpretation of it in the absence of any kind of actual formal guidance or legislative kind of process that's been fully completed. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as in later in the report about what that uncertainty kind of means. The following page talks about some of the areas that the committee should consider and things for the authority to consider. But I would say, at this stage, there's no issue around the timeliness of the council's financial reporting. The draft accounts were issued by the 31st of May deadline, and we have no concerns around working papers or the responsiveness of the finance team to the audit process to discuss. So those are really in there just as kind of high-level sector-wide points. I would go then to page 12, where we talk about the materiality that we set for the audit. And when we sent this report to officers, we had a query from the Director of Finance, which, he suggested it might be helpful for us to talk a little bit more about this. So we set the sort of what we call our planning materiality. That's our understanding of, how big would a number in the accounts need to be for it to influence the user of the accounts, and what basis should we set that on. So for the council, we consider expenditure to be the main measure that a member of the public would be interested in. And so we use a percentage of the council's gross expenditure to determine that sort of headline materiality figure. And then we consider the likelihood of error in the accounts, which for this authority we consider to be quite low. And therefore we use a percentage of that overall materiality in determining what we actually do in the balances that we audit and the degree to which we audit them. And that's the performance materiality figure. And then the final one is our audit differences limit, and that is saying that anything we identify above that level, which management may, for good reason, choose not to adjust in the accounts, we would report to yourselves in our audit results report at the end of the audit process. I'll then just talk briefly to section 2 of the report, because that sets out the risks that we've identified for the audit for this year for Portsmouth City Council. So we're required to presume that there are certain risks of fraud in all sets of accounts under the auditing standards. This is page 17, of the report per the big page numbers. It's the big number. The little number is 15 in this case, starting out there with the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition. So this is the first of the presumed risks under the ISA. It's not to say that we think that there is a particularly heightened risk of this at Portsmouth City Council. We're required to recognise it on all audits. And so the way in which this risk might manifest itself at the authority is to move revenue expenditure out of the income statement onto the balance sheet. And so we test additions to property, plant and equipment and REFCUS expenditure accordingly as set out in the what will we do column on that page. we're also required to recognise that fraud risk in any income stream which cannot be said to be sort of local government specific. So we're able to rebut the risk for things like council tax, business rates, grants and fees. But on page 18, we're setting out that we have identified that fraud risk, again, in theory, not that to say that we think it's actually there, in trading and investment property income, because those are more commercial income streams for the council. The third presumed risk of fraud then is on page 19 per the big page numbers, which I think is page 17 per the EY numbers. And that's the risk of misstatement due to fraud or error in a general sense. Sometimes this is called the risk of management override of controls. Again, a required risk that we recognise on all of our audits under the ISAs. And the focus here is testing of journal entries, review of management estimates for any evidence of bias, and looking at anything that might be considered to be a significant unusual transaction. Then across the next couple of pages, we have risks in relation to the value of property, plant and equipment. This is an area of significant materiality to the accounts. There's a lot of judgment used in setting these valuations. And it's an area which the regulator of our audits is particularly interested in. So we do quite an extensive programme of work. Steve is probably sort of grimacing over there, but quite an extensive programme of work around these valuations, and that's covering the areas set out on page 20, and then on page 21, in specifically around Lakeside North Harbour, just because of the value of that asset compared to the asset portfolio as a whole. The rest of this section talks about what we would call inherent risks. So these are areas of sort of increased audit focus, but not as much as those that I've been talking to previously. And so just to summarise, we have risks there around the pension liability, other valuation methodologies that require less judgment on the part of the valuer and the authority, and then the authority's group accounts assessment and restatement of its main statements because of portfolio changes in the year. On page 25, there is one new accounting standard which comes into effect in 24-25, where the authority has to make some disclosures in the current year, and that's around lease accounting. And so we would, again, do the work set out on that page of the report, just to get some assurance over the authority's preparedness for the full introduction of that new standard in the following year. Briefly then, section 3 sets out again around value for money, that there's background on what our responsibilities in that area entail, but again, to summarise, we haven't identified any risks of significant weakness for 23-24 in your value for money arrangements at this point in time. Just a couple of other things to quickly highlight. On page 35 per the big numbers, 33 per the EY, this is again following on from the point around the uncertainty around the reset process. There are areas which we may have to come back and reconsider in our audit planning, depending on the outcome of that. And I think the main one here is around what the effect will be on opening balances. If the audit of 22-23, it doesn't go ahead because we get to the backstop date and it is disclaimed, then we wouldn't have assurance over the opening balances for 23-24. So there would be some considerations that would need to be given to that. The other area that's then impacted generally is on page 41, which is the timeline for the audit. So we've set out here our current expectation of when we will bring to you our audit results report and this year's auditor's annual report. But again, that could be impacted further by the outcome of those consultations and the reset process. And then just very lastly, again, something which was commented on by the officers when they reviewed the report, on page 49, which is the appendix that shows the audit fees. Because the procedures performed to date for 22-23 have been limited to the value for money, the scale fee, which is shown there in the top line of the table, would have been for the full completion of the audit for 22-23. So there is an expectation as things stand that part of that would be repaid to the council. But again, that is dependent on the outcome of the reset process, and then it would be independently adjudicated by PSAA. It wouldn't be the EY saying how much is payable. There would be a third party there to determine what the fair fee would be for the work done. So apologies, I appreciate I've spoken at quite a bit of length on that third report, but I think because it has that context of the impacts back onto the previous two, I thought that was worth going through a bit more.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you mentioned that the leases is going to be a new piece of legislation coming in, new regulations. Just looking at the notes on it on page, big page 11, it does say that voluntary adoption is permitted and encouraged prior to the mandatory date. I don't suppose you or perhaps any of the other officers present know whether Portsmouth has or is planning to adopt early, or if we are going to be doing it when the actual mandatory date comes in.
It's our intention that we won't be adopting early, so we'll be adopting IFRS 16 from the 1st of April 2024.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Stuart, you pinch mine. Thank you very much. Again, is the report noted?
I'm actually genuinely reassured that there is a plan to deal with the backlog and not just let it domino further down the line. I think those backstop dates are eminently sensible.
Yeah, agreed. I think it needs to be kept under control. Thank you. Right, if everyone's happy with that, that's noted. Next item is item 7, Internal Audit Performance Status Report, 1st of July 2024, an annual audit opinion, 2023-24, and we've got Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor, and Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor. And now introduce the report and answer any questions. Is there anything you want to bring members' attention to?
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of items that are included in the report that would be good to just clarify with you. They'll be standard in all future reports kind of coming to this committee. The progress report would detail any outstanding items of work that we've completed since the last reporting period. Well, the last reporting period you noted was back in February, so there is quite a lot of work contained within the progress report that details the individual reviews. We completed the work that was scheduled. There are 2 items, though, that were taken out right towards the tail end of the year. They're noted on page 77. Both of those, though, will be considered, and one is included, although you'd already approved the plan for 24-25. So the PFI review that was scheduled that we bounced will now be included in this year's item of work. Page 76 narrates obviously any other items of work that we've been involved in. That will be standard information contained within these reports. Then if we move through to page 80 onwards, there is a list of all of the audits that we have completed. I'm not going to go through them in any detail at all, but obviously if there's any queries, then we can answer those. Chair, if you're happy, I'm going to stop there and pause because there's a lot within those reports that you may have questions on before I then go to the annual opinion.
Thank you. The deferred audits, when will they be done? Do we know? Or?
If they're deferred from one annual plan, they are considered for the future one. So the PFI review will be performed between now and the end of March 2025. We haven't actually scheduled that one yet. The scheduling is not at a granular level because it's quite flexible to the work that we perform across all client bases. So it depends where the availability of resources and whether there is pressures on services so that we don't impact upon them at a given time.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Simpson.
It's not so much a question, it's more of an observation. I'm relatively new to I want to say GAS, but gas. I think one of the questions really is, having a look at the last table on page 11, I suppose, or 103, how do we improve with the limited assurances? You know, because with compliance with laws and regulations and with effectiveness of operations, there's 6, and both of those. How do we improve those to bring them all into the reasonable assurance? You know, what can we put in place, or how can we do that?
Thank you, Councillor. You've gone on to the next report. But in answer to your question, we actually audit under a particular framework, and you would have noted, because you've flagged limited assurance under compliance with laws and policies. So the framework that we audit under come under those particular headings, i.e. the achievement, the safeguarding of assets and so forth. To answer your query with how can we make certain that there is good controls in place, it's about continually reviewing, I think, the effectiveness and weighing the benefits against any detrimental additional work that isn't required and makes it less efficient. The authority, like most of them, struggle when there is a time pressure attributed to a particular area. So, for example, if we look at complaints, we have to respond within a time frame. And that might mean when we look at it, if we're saying it's limited or they're not complying, it's because they've gone over that particular time frame. So the result...
To interject, has the backlog not helped with that then? The fact that we're backlogged on the previous reports, has that also not helped because that you've had to deal with that before this as well? Or am I getting everything mixed? Oh, okay. I retract then. Okay, Karen.
Yes, so improvements within the service, there is usually an action plan as to how they can address it. Sometimes it may be a capacity issue. Very often tethered to compliance, there is a capacity issue because it's about achieving time frames and doing assessments in accordance with what the framework states.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions around the audits that have had follow-ups. I noticed there's a few there where they've stayed limited assurance from original testing to follow-up checks. Some of them say that they're in progress. Some of them say they haven't started. Do we have reasonable assurance that they're actually going to be making those improvements, and will they be further spot checked to see if they're improving?
So to address a residual issue with not implementing actions when they've agreed that actions would be implemented, we have set up something called an audit action tracker, and each of the directorates have visibility regarding open exceptions or open risk exposures. The action tracker then enables them to take not ownership, because they already have the ownership, but it enables them to populate if they believe that they've closed an action at an earlier stage. So we're hoping that raises the profile. In addition to that, we are giving each of the directorates a very short report on a quarterly basis that is stating what is open and what is coming up for review, so that it keeps the focus in those particular areas. Unfortunately, implementing agreed actions is a common problem across all of the client base, and I think if you don't keep your eye on your ball, that's where it can get distracted and not implemented. But ultimately, there's still a risk exposure, so we're hoping that aids. We will see by the end of the year whether it's had an impact.
Do you think you may be able to give us an update at a future meeting on the effectiveness of that measure?
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, so can I take you through the annual opinion? So the annual opinion, obviously at the beginning of the year, and we've already done this when we came along in February, to say this is the list of activities that we'd like to audit across the year, and that is one means of assessing the effectiveness of the internal control framework. You will note from the opinion that is presented to you, there is standard information again that has to be included. That's because the internal audit section has to abide by public sector internal audit standards. So you can expect to see common themes included. The work performed across the year, we're looking at how many of the audits have been rated as limited, are there any no assurance, what's the traction with implementing agreed actions, what other intelligence is there that audit has been involved in, which would have been narrated in part of the progress report that says the other areas that we get involved in. As an authority, generally, most areas are pretty well controlled, and the arrangements in place are pretty robust. That's what fundamentally enables me to give the opinion of reasonable assurance that across the organisation, whilst there is pockets where those control arrangements are weak or maybe failing, collectively across the organisation there is sufficient that is either reasonable assurance or assurance that would warrant the overall opinion. So beyond giving the opinion, we also on an annual basis need to inform you of any counter-fraud work that we've been involved in, which is in the latter part of the report. That also may contribute to the opinion and the ratings. And I also need to say to you regarding any quality assurance work on the internal audit service, which enables us to meet our standards. So I have to tell you whether we are failing as a service in any particular areas and whether we have any skills gaps. You will note again towards the latter end of the report, the skills gap analysis. There are some areas that have been flagged, and it is to inform you as being, in effect, the internal audit sections board, that is raised with you so that you have visibility regarding our resource levels. Beyond that, Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we know what's being done to address those skills gaps?
That again is included within. We had a number of individuals who had retired. Wonderful for them, but obviously that left us with a skills gap. We've got a developmental programme within the service and within the partnership that we operate, and that's where we're actually looking, and we have already started plugging the gaps that we have in place. But I think it is appropriate to flag and to monitor.
Thank you. Members? Councillor Simpson.
I think this has already been mentioned, but I'm looking at 106 and the auditor's completed summary, and I actually see quite a bit of limited assurance throughout, and I'm wondering what do we put in place, and what do we put in place so that if something is limited assurance for more than 1 year, how do we make sure that is improved if it hasn't been highlighted already? Because I can see obviously some it says here improvement in assurance level and comments, but I think there's only one that's next to a limited assurance. So how do we, what's the process of if we do have a perpetrator each year that's the same?
So process would be the action tracker that I previously mentioned and visibility within the directorates, but then this committee also has the visibility because as and when we perform any follow-up work, we bring the results back to yourselves. We'll only perform follow-up work twice because we're moving away from visibility on the whole of the system, and actually it's healthy to revisit the whole of the system. As a committee though, if you are not satisfied with the level of progress to mitigate risk exposures within any areas within the council, you have the ability to ask the director of that particular area to come along and explain. If when we do a follow-up though there is a genuine reason and things have shifted, i.e. in a negative way, but that's what's impacting upon the ability to mitigate the risk, again we will share that with you. But there will be robust plans for every single area that we look at if there is a gap and what they're looking to do, what the services are looking to do to address it. But there's various mechanisms.
Really comes back to what I think what Stuart was saying of how often are these reports brought forward to us, and you said it's only 2 a year, so I'm guessing that's every 6 months? Or have I just completely misunderstood that?
No, apologies. Every meeting that this committee has, you will get a progress report. To follow up, though, if we have a risk exposure and the agreed action date is in 2 months' time, we are not going to look at it and then conversely bring it back to you until about 3 to 4 months' time. If it is a critical exception, if they are exceptions of high and below, we will follow up the following year.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Lizzie, could you give us a little bit more detail around the consultancy review for shareholder governance companies, please?
We're required, again, under the public sector internal audit standards, to actually also consider whether there is a role where we're in attendance in an advisory capacity, but it gets captured and badged as being consultancy work. So in actual fact, that would have been myself attending the shareholder committee in an advisory capacity across the year.
Is that why it doesn't have any assurance ratings associated with it? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. So members, it's recommended that the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee notes the audit performance and results for 2023-2024 to July 2024 and any highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed from 2023 to 2024 audit plan, including follow-up work performed and the annual audit report and opinion for 2023-2024. Is the report noted, members? Thank you. Right. Next item is item 8, the Treasury Management Outturn Report 2023-2024. And we've got Richard Webb, who's Deputy Director of Finance Resources, and Stephen Bolshaw, Finance Manager, and they're here to introduce the report and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform members of the Council's Treasury Management activities for the financial year 23-24 and of the position as at the 31st of March 2024. During the last financial year, the Council operated within the approved limits of the Treasury Management Strategy, and during the 23-24 financial year, the Council undertook no new borrowing. The Council ended the year with a gross debt of 734 million and gross investments of 302 million, giving rise to a net debt of 432 million. Overall, the net Treasury management costs were 1.3 million below budget, as you can see from the appendix in the report, but this is due mainly to higher than anticipated investment returns throughout the year. I haven't got anything else to add, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members? Councillor Brown?
Isn't that the second or third year in a row we've had better than expected returns on investments?
The investment, sorry, can you hear me? The interest rates were higher than we anticipated, and they stayed higher, as you might imagine, in the wider context of the economy than had been anticipated, and therefore the returns are higher during that financial year. Obviously, that is not expected to maintain throughout the future years, as we're expecting interest rates to decline at some point. But at this point in 23-24, we did benefit from those higher interest returns.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No? In that case, it's recommended that the actual prudential and treasury management indicators based on the unaudited accounts as shown in Appendix B be noted. And is the report noted? Thank you. Thank you very much. Next is item 9, Corporate Performance Report, Q4, 2023-2024. And Kelly Nash, Corporate Performance Manager, is in attendance to introduce the report and answer any questions. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is part of a series of regular reports that come to the committee on a quarterly basis, and the purpose of the report is to give the committee assurance that there is a functioning performance framework in the organisation that focuses on making sure that we're doing the right things that we've said we're going to do and generating the right sort of outputs for those. It's not the job of the committee to do the performance management, but to be assured that there is something in place that is tracking our performance and give you comfort that that is happening. What we present to you is a report that picks up key performance indicators presented across the corporate priority themes for the organisation, and a suite of reports around how major transformational projects are happening in the organisation. As general practice with the committee, happy to take questions on any of those points of detail, although obviously it's a very broad sweep of report across the authorities. We can't necessarily answer them in the moment, but what we would do is undertake to come back with responses on any particular queries raised. So I don't think there's anything else to say. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. There was just one I had. Not all of the items have targets. Is that normal, or is that they're just things that haven't?
Some of them do, some of them don't, and in some of those cases that's a very deliberate choice, which is to do with the fact that actually setting a target feels uncomfortable, and actually the conversation we're having for the next round of reporting, so obviously 24-25, is that we might modify some of the language there, and in some cases we might be talking about an expectation or a benchmark, simply because sometimes that just feels more comfortable language for people in terms of what they're doing. For some of them, there's not necessarily that line there to measure against, because it's either a new indicator or just something where we're getting a sense of trend, and it would be inappropriate to send that particular case. So there'll be various reasons why, if there isn't a target set, that will be the case. In some cases we'll push back and said, actually, we think that could be something that comes forward next year, so there will be a combination of reasons for that. But yes, that's absolutely right. In some cases they are there, in some cases they're not.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
I stole your question earlier, you just stole mine. Obviously the issue of not having target lines on some of the graphs has been raised in previous years as well. Obviously it's the same issue. I had a specific question around, if there aren't any targets there, how is it possible to assign a RAG rating against target? Because obviously we've got against target and against trend. Trend you can obviously see, bars change over time. If there is no target present, how is it possible to assign a RAG rating against target?
It shouldn't be. Which one have I printed wrongly? Because that will almost certainly be a mistake on my part. Okay, if you wanted to clarify with me which ones they are, I'll follow up and make sure that that is my error and there's not something else that we need to be presenting.
Judging from the black and white, it's at least E8, E11, E12, I think that's a coloured one, where there's no target line on the graph, but there's a RAG rating given. They're dotted throughout the reports. E1, there's a RAG rating with no target.
I'll look back on those and just check what the purpose of that would have been then, because it's either going to be my error, or it will be there's something being telegraphed there that just hasn't picked up in the commentary, so I'll come back to you on those.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other question? Councillor Smythe.
Kelly won't be surprised at this comment, but I always long to see, I think this is excellent, this is really useful, a really good lot of work gone on behind this, but I really have a passion for making sure that we're much more often looking at outcomes for people rather than processes. And a lot of confusion in these lists. You know, it might say establish a plan to do this, or establish a group to do that. Anything that makes me say, so what, I think should be discouraged in these reports, and we should much more be looking at what the people out there are experiencing. Is their health improving as a result of the things that we're doing? And there are some shining examples of where that is measured and where that is put in there, and I really like that. But there's quite a lot of it that makes me want to say, so what? I can give you an example. Just when you're looking for and you can't see it, I'm looking at the wrong place, but well, here we've got formal launch of family hubs, which will offer well-attended and offer established next steps, which look at sustainable exit plan post-funding. Fine, but we need to make sure that the family hubs we have are actually working to improve outcomes for children, which in this case is more children are ready for school than next year than last year. people might recall that Portsmouth in the end of the 90s was absolutely a pioneer of outcome-focused planning and reform. And I'm afraid that we've just kind of lost that slightly. If it's any use to anybody, I'll go through this report in more detail and highlight where I think we missed an opportunity to look at outcomes for people rather than a process that might or might not deliver the outcomes. But there is a lot of good work in here, and I'm very glad we've got this plan. I'm reassured about the sort of details of the commentary here. I think, you know, where there's a RAG rating, I don't yet, even in the commentary, see a very confident statement that we'll be able to turn around that next year. But I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but looking at it strategically, I think we work really hard, but unless we're absolutely convinced that what we're doing is improving the lives, the health, the employability, the employment, the education of people out there, then it's just slightly off focus and possibly is causing us a bit more work than we need to do.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? No. Members, it's recommended that the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee notes the report in the revised format and agrees if any further action is required in response to performance issues highlighted. Is that noted? Thank you.
You could say Councillor Smythe expressed concern that there were a lot of processes in there and that further attention should be given to measuring outcomes for people in terms of health.
Yeah, we can add that. A little more emphasis on outcomes. No, that's fine. We can add that. Yeah. Perfect. And next item, item 10, which again, Kelly.
It is, yeah. This is to bring to the committee the draft annual governance statement. So the annual governance statement is something we're required to produce every year that basically sets out the control framework for the organisation, assurance that control framework is operating, and also identifies their particular risks or exposure that we want to give focus to in the coming year to make sure that any weaknesses are addressed. This comes to you in a draft form. We always have a practice of bringing it in an advanced draft form so that we can take on board any comments from the committee and adjust it before we present it in its final form. So this comes to you as an advanced draft. A lot of the detail of the control framework is actually attached in the local code of governance, which we update on a sort of 2-yearly cycle, mainly because not an awful lot of it changes in between times, so that's also attached, but the detail of that would have been considered last time round, so that really comes just for information this time round. So again, happy to take any particular questions, and again, we'll make any adjustments to the draft, taking on board comments that will be presented alongside the statement of accounts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
If we don't have anything now, but we have something later on, is that okay to reach out? Obviously, there's a lot. There's a lot in there to break down.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And again, if you want to discuss in any particular detail where some of those weaknesses were identified and the processes we follow, really happy to talk about that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Anything? Any suggestions? No? Okay, thank you. Actually, I'm happy to propose the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Is that one? Yes. Councillor Brown. Thank you. Right, item 11. Reappointment of independent persons. Helen Dickerson, Deputy City Solicitor, is in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions, and members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to add?
Thank you, Chair. There is a requirement under Section 28 of the Localism Act for independent persons to be appointed to look at member complaints. We have 3 people, Chris Ryder, Diana Turner and Carol Damper. They stand for a period of 3 years, and this is a report looking at their reappointment. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members? Councillor Brown.
Not a question so much as just to say, having sat on a few RFPs over the last 4 years, the independent persons do a fantastic job of bringing balance and a non-political real person into the equation. So I think I'd also like to place on record our thanks to the independent persons for their previous service, and happy to endorse the reappointment.
Thank you. Any other? We're at work, I think, yes. So, members, it's recommended that the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee recommends that the Council appoint Chris Ryder, Diana Turner and Carol Damper as independent persons for 3 years from 17th of July 2024 through to 31st of July 2027. And I think we all agree we'd like to thank them for their work on behalf of the Council. Members, it's agreed that this be recommended to full Council? Perfect, thank you. And now on to item 12, consideration of the political balance rules in relation to the constitution of the subcommittees considering complaints against members. Helen's here to introduce the report and answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll be aware, there is an intention that there should be proportionality of political parties in relation to committees that are based within the Council. For the purpose of member complaints, now that there are more than 3 political groups, it is very more difficult to deal with proportionality on the subcommittees for the assessment and hearings of complaints and the initial filtering panel, and therefore there's a recommendation that they disapply the political balance rules. Obviously, there's a need for timeliness in relation to member complaints, and whilst all efforts are made to provide as much proportionality as possible, that actually there are occasions when, from the point of view of moving things forward in a timely fashion and the availability of councillors, bearing in mind that it's generally 3 councillors that are sought from this committee, that actually those rules should be disapplied for this particular purpose.
Thank you. Members, any questions? I think this is fairly standard. Yeah. If there's no questions, members, it's recommended that the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee disapplies the political balance rules in respect of Governance and Audit and Standards subcommittees, which are considering complaints against members, and also the same arrangement should apply in respect of initial filtering panel membership. I'm happy to propose a recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brown, thank you. Members, is this recommendation agreed? Thank you. And I think that's it. Thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting, and thank you for your attendance, and close the meeting at just before 6 o'clock.